Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Jack Zenger. I'm joined today by my longtime colleague, Joe Folkman,
Hello.
world-renowned psychometrician and statistician.
Oh,
So Joe, off we go.
okay. Well, have you ever been on a hike in the forest and lost track of where you are? There was no trail. And as you think about a leadership journey, one of the important elements of having a successful journey is knowing where you are. And, it's hard to get to where you want to go if you don't know where you are. We love that GPS analogy that gives you the you or here kind of dimension and lets you know where you are. So many times in leadership development, people sort of jump in, but they don't have an accurate assessment, an accurate read on what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and where's my passion and energy. And so this is the value of 360, and it's something that we think is very important. We also think it's incredibly predictive. Now, we did some research with a large corporation. They had a very effective process for measuring the effectiveness of their leaders. They used a 9-box placement assessment. A 9-box, there's 3 boxes on the performance dimension and 3 boxes on the potential dimension. And a sort of a 9, if you get the best score, a 9, it is high potential, high performance. They did a very good job of that. It was done by a group of managers in a succession planning kind of a process. We used that data, assessment data, and we looked at the correlation between the placement data and a psychological assessment. And that correlation was 0.14. Now, a correlation coefficient, it'll go from -1 to +1, but in this case, these are only positive. So 0 to 1, 1.0. A 0.14 isn't very good. It doesn't show a high level of correlation. A 1.0 would be a perfect level of correlation. So 0.14 is pretty low. We actually had climate survey data. And actually, climate survey data was more predictive than the psychological assessment. It had a 0.22 correlation. But then we looked at 360 data, and what we found is the correlation was 0.51. That is significantly higher. What we're saying here is that we believe a 360, well-constructed 360, a valid 360, is the best predictor of leadership potential that is available in any organization. And we think that that can be a guiding light, but also as you think about getting a 360, is this accurate? Is this telling me what I'm good at? Again, if it's an effective 360, it's a good indicator of your potential and your ability to lead. And we talked about that 9-box placement. Here's a typical 9-box grid, and you can see the three dimensions up and 3 over. So, okay, Jack.
Okay, so we'll be talking with you today about the basic building blocks of what we believe is an optimum 360-degree instrument. And those 4 building blocks are these. First of all, how it gets created. And we're going to propose to you that ideally it is created not just by a group of people looking at a long list of questions and picking the ones that they find to be most appealing, but that it's done much more rigorously and scientifically. The second building block is that it become an instrument that's really friendly to the participant, that the participant ought to be able to understand it, and that they will gain positive insights about themselves, that it not be an unpleasant experience, but that it also be an experience that gives them some fresh new insights about their strengths and their opportunities for becoming even better. And the final a major component, we believe, of the optimum 360 is its ability to serve organizational purposes and to track the overall organizational leadership strength. And so the balance of our webinar today will be going through these four major components in a little more detail, kind of a deeper dive into each one. So let's again look at this first one. Our experience has been that very often 360s get created by a group of managers sitting around and looking at a long list of items and saying, well, which one do you think, would really make sense? And which one do you like? And so it's put together by some very well-intentioned individuals who are doing their best to choose what they think are the right items. We think, though, that the challenge is that there's a more scientific and rigorous way to do it. First of all, it kind of ideally would begin with having a clear model of leadership. The very idea of leadership for a lot of people is kind of murky. And so being able to spell out, okay, so what's our belief about what leadership, what constitutes leadership? So we've shown you one possibility. There are others, certainly, but we envision it as being kind of a tent with some poles that basically represent focusing on results, a group of personal capabilities, the ability of a leader to lead change, and a leader to have very effective interpersonal skills, all kind of united by a pole in the middle, which is their character, their integrity, their honesty. So we believe that having a model around which the instrument is created is one important ingredient. The second one is that the items, rather than just being ones that somebody thinks are appealing, are really very carefully selected to kind of balance efficiency and efficacy, but along with brevity. So one of the challenges of the whole 360-degree feedback process is that if the instrument is 100 items and it takes people 40 minutes to complete, there's an enormous fatigue that sets in, especially when managers are being asked to rate many of their colleagues, all of their subordinates, and their boss. We've heard stories of managers who had, 30 or 40 of these to complete in a period of time. And if it's a long, arduous process, fatigue sets in. We think another element of this being created more scientifically is that the instrument should have proven correlation with important business outcomes. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. And finally, we're going to propose to you that whatever scale that is being used as people respond to it, that it's a scale that avoids having false positives. And Joe's going to talk with you about that. So Joe, go for it.
So let's start with this empirically created assessment. And what's interesting in my experience is that I used to believe that I could create really good items, that I could write a really great item. The reality is that I didn't know which of my items were great and which were terrible. And the only way to know that is to test them. So what we do is create a large sample of leaders, and we analyzed thousands of items. We looked at over 2,000 different items. And what we looked at were the best leaders and the worst leaders. And we said, okay, which items separate the best from the worst? If we looked at the top 10% to the bottom 10%. Once we found items that were really good at differentiating, then we'd cluster them together. We'd do some factor analysis to figure out which competencies they were associated with. And then we used the competencies that are most differentiating. So not all competencies are differentiating. This is a huge thing. Would you want to spend the time working on changing a behavior that nobody notices, that nobody cares about, or that very few people care about? Let me give you an example of a differentiating item. We had an item is on time to meetings. I thought that was a great item. You know, although I'm sometimes late, I don't like it when other people are late. But is that a differentiating item? When we looked at the worst leaders, you can see the blue, the light blue, actually the worst leaders scored higher on being on time to meetings than the best leaders. That wasn't a differentiating item. Now, I know some of you are really excited about that because you're regularly late. Okay. It doesn't matter so much when you get there, it's what you do when you get there, okay? But if we look at another item like, does everything possible to reach goals? What you see is the difference score between the worst leaders and the best leaders. What we want those differentiating items to do is if you're bad, it really hurts you. And if you're really good, it really helps you. You want to spend your time working on competencies that make the biggest difference. And knowing this is critical to being a successful leader. Now, Jack, one of the interesting things we got was a question from one of the participants that wanted to know about who should choose your raters. Should it be the person themselves or their manager, or is it a combination? And I'll be interested in your perspective on this. What do you think, Jack? Is it just the person themselves, or you know, by the way, this time of year, I used to pick cherries for my uncle. And this is where I think the term cherry picking came from, because I always move around and try to find the tree with the most cherries.
Right. You know, I think, Joe, that the answer is a little bit tricky because the nice thing about having participants choose the raters is that they then have a great deal of confidence and trust in the results that they're getting. The occasional danger is that this person will only choose people who are very favorable to him or her, and maybe they don't always choose a balance in terms of respondents. So I think most organizations have said, let the participant propose who their respondents should be. And then let's just have somebody, some manager or somebody in the HR world say, does this represent a very fair cross-section of the people with whom you work? And so it's probably ideally a little bit of both. But isn't there some good data, Joe, that it doesn't make a lot of difference if the person chooses their respondents versus if they're chosen by somebody in human resources or by the level above manager above them?
Yeah. So what's interesting is sometimes people will select who they think are their advocates. What's interesting is that sometimes you're friends with somebody, but when you get a 360 survey and it asks a question about a behavior that sort of bothers you a little bit, sometimes the cherry picking doesn't work as well as you'd like it to, because I've had people say to me, I thought I was selecting my friends here, but obviously I didn't. So
honesty prevails.
well, it does, because when you're annoyed by a behavior, you tend to give people that feedback. So it doesn't always work, but sometimes having that little thing of saying, look, you need to ask all of your direct reports and these kinds of peers. So you put some limits on it, that can help in the process. But having it reviewed by your boss, that's a good thing.
Okay, we were talking about important dimensions of 360-degree feedback instruments. And we believe that one important dimension is that whatever instrument gets created needs to have a high correlation with important business outcomes. And we're here to kind of tell you that if you do that, if you create scientifically a good, well put together instrument it will have a high correlation with the things that you see on the screen. It'll correlate with the profitability of this branch or unit or store that you work with. It will be predictive of customer satisfaction. That revenue and revenue growth will be very predicted by this instrument. Turnover, and this is employee turnover, not retail sales turnover. But turnover will be related to the effectiveness of this 360 instrument. The willingness of people in the organization to put forth, their full effort, and their intention to leave the organization. All of those outcomes and many more will be correlated with a really effective 360. So better leaders produce better results, and the 360 is a way of measuring better leaders.
And as you're doing a 360, if you can't have that proof for the managers, they'll not give it as much credibility, and they'll not give it as much of their attention. So what we know from our data, this is a study of 100,000 leaders, over 100,000, where we look at leadership effectiveness. That's the horizontal axis. We go from the 5th to the 100th percentile. And what we're measuring there is employee engagement. And I usually ask people, have you ever worked for a bad boss? And they say, yes. What was it like? It was terrible. Well, if you have a terrible boss, you have a disengaged employee. If you have a good boss, engagement's about average. But if you have a great boss, you love your job, and you know that engagement affects so many other aspects of working that. So having this data that show the evidence of the correlation between your 360 data and outcomes is a critical piece to saying, hey, this measurement actually works. And it's very important for the success of the business. Now, we want to talk a little bit about the survey scale that you use to measure things. And when I first started doing this research and using 360s, I used an agree, disagree scale. It's very common, and it's interesting, but there's a problem with this kind of a scale. And I find that most 360s I look at continue to use an agree, disagree scale. And it has a problem with it. Let me demonstrate the problem. If you ask a question, listens carefully and attentively, and if you think, okay, this person is an okay listener, they're okay. They're not great, but they're okay. You might say on that scale, I agree. They're okay. Okay. You get a 4 out of 5. And when the person gets the feedback, they look at the feedback and say, I got a 4. I'm doing pretty good. Now, what we found is if we switch the scale to this scale, where 5 was outstanding strength, 4 was strength, 3 was competent, 2 was needs some improvement, and 1 was needs significant improvement. When we tested both scales with a group of people, we actually found that the average score decreased by 0.75, almost 3/4 of a point. It went down. And one of the problems with a lot of 360s is that they are overly positive. Everybody's fine. And what the scale helps you do is really give you and avoid what we call a false positive. And that really gives you a more accurate read, because in this case, being okay, you're competent, it's not a strength. And so we think that is a much better scale, and it gives more accurate feedback to the people that are getting the feedback.
Okay, the second major building block that we're going to propose to you is that the optimum 360 is very friendly to the participant. We do not believe that it's necessary to have a PhD psychologist sit down with somebody and explain to them the meaning of the report that they get. The report ought to be, simple for the layman to understand. And so we believe that the ideal 360 is one that people walk away having had a good experience. It's helped them understand from the perspective of, on average, 14 respondents who have replied to them, that here are their strengths. And very often we talk to people and hear people saying, I didn't realize, how respected and how people appreciate, what I do. Now, we're not suggesting that it should ignore weaknesses, particularly those weaknesses that maybe detract from their performance. But the experience should be a positive one, and one that they can manage relatively well themselves. So that's the beginning. Joe, what would you add?
Well, anytime you get an assessment and people look at the results, where do they go? It goes back to when they were a kid and they brought home their report card. And what did your parents look at? It is so easy. And I have to admit that for 25 years, what I would do is give people 360 results and kind of say, well, figure out why you're such a loser. I focused on the weaknesses. And it was only when Jack and I got together and we looked at, a lot of data that we discovered the problem there. The problem is that 80% of the people that get feedback will be better off focusing on a strength rather than working on the weaknesses. So we're saying that for most people, the idea of getting a 360 and sort of saying, okay, figure out what's wrong with you, that's the wrong approach. 80% of the time, it is the wrong approach. And let me show you the reason why. One of the first studies that Jack and I did when we first started working together is we looked at the impact of strengths, and a strength was a competency at the 90th percentile. We were measuring that for 19 competencies. And if a person didn't have any profound strengths, 0 strengths, their average effectiveness was the 34th percentile. What would happen if you were good at one thing? If you had one strength, a competency at the 90th percentile, the overall average effectiveness went from the 34th percentile to the 64th percentile. It was like it completely changed the perception, because it went from not very good to okay. 64th percentile is pretty good, but if you were really good at 3 things, if you had 3 strengths, you're at the 81st percentile. And if you were good at 5, you're in the 90th percentile of all leaders. What this did is changed our view. We started to see 360 as a tool to help people figure out how they can stand out, how they can differentiate themselves, how they can really show up differently in their leadership. Now, as I said, 80% of the time, what we think is the best advice for leaders is develop a strength, stand out for something, differentiate yourself. But for 20% of the people, they have something we'd call a fatal flaw. 360 is excellent at helping people understand when they really are doing something wrong, when they have a fatal flaw. We call it a fatal flaw because we want people to get the message. Weaknesses are actually okay. Fatal flaws, not okay. So people with 1 or more fatal flaws, their average effectiveness is the 18th percentile. This is a crushing weakness. It kills their effectiveness. And we've actually found in our data that people that address that fatal flaw, that they don't turn it into a profound strength, but they mitigate it a bit and they bring it up a bit and they turn it into a weakness. Actually, their average effectiveness goes up above the 50th percentile. We find that after 18 to 24 months, they can really change how effective they are.
Okay, the next thing we want to talk about is the most effective or the optimum 360-degree feedback process should also help the individual who's participating to see opportunities for how they can remedy some development target that they have, and that they can see some alternatives to doing that. So, for example, one of the competencies, capabilities that gets frequently measured is a person's technical and professional acumen. And when someone either says, well, I'm pretty good at that, but I want to get better, or if they've gotten feedback that says, oh, you've really got a problem here, there are some logical things that they think about doing. Okay, I'll read some more books. I'll subscribe to some journals. I'll attend some seminars. I'll go take a class at the local college. I will seek out people in my organization who are very technically competent, and I'll seek to have them kind of coach me. So there are several things that are obvious and logical to do. But what we found that if you have a lot of data, you find that, well, are there some other things that people who are perceived to be really good at their technical and professional capability, what do they do? And so we've found out from looking at inside our database that these people also have what we've called strength builders. And those capabilities or qualities or those behaviors are things like good at problem solving, good at building relationships, more effective at communicating, that they have a broader perspective about what the organization is doing, that they are people who are inclined to take initiative, and they are kind of self-starters, and their fingerprints are all over projects and activities that are occurring, and that they always kind of put the team and the team's performance and the team's interests before their own personal ones. We've called these strength building activities, and the 360 can help you understand what those are and lead you to kind of seeing some of those opportunities that exist around you.
Jack, this is one of, I think, the most significant things that we've brought to the field that's unique. I think most of the development advice for people is, well, just if you want to get better at technical skills, just read more technical journals, and you've got some geeky guy who's technical, and you go, the last thing you need to do is getting more technical. But wouldn't it help if he could actually tell you what's going on and communicate well? Wouldn't it help if he had a good relationship with people?
And so, yeah, so let's be clear that what the 360 does is that it lets the person who's the participant understand which of these strength building behaviors he or she currently utilizes.
Yeah.
So it not only tells them how they score on the overall competency, technical and professional acumen, but then also lets them know, how am I doing on these strength building behaviors that are highly correlated to it.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, we do believe that the Optimum 360 is an instrument that helps the participant to create for themselves a very practical, actionable development plan. And one of the things that it does is that it raises their aspirations, and it helps them to kind of see what are the possibilities. And Joe, we've got a couple of examples here that maybe will help people see how it helps people understand that, being average is one thing, but being aspiring to something more than that is maybe worth looking at. So go through that.
So what's funny, I think, is I see a lot of 360s where people are compared to the average, right?
Yeah.
I think this is really amusing because if you compare people to the average and they get scores that are a little bit above average, they're going, I'm good. I'm good. I'm doing well. It's like, and you say to the creators of this thing, you say, so what you're after is just above average leaders? Is that what you want? No, we want great leaders. And so, why not compare people to the best leaders? Why not compare, So what we really like to do is show you where you are compared to leaders at the 90th percentile. And what are you trying to do here? Are you trying to get people to just be a little bit better, kind of above average? Are you trying to be great leadership? And I think this is really what you're after, is to really take people and how can you get great leaders?
Okay. The next thing that we believe that the optimum 360 instrument needs to do is to help the participant create for themselves a practical, actionable plan. Now, one of the things that I think most 360-degree instruments attempt to do is to give the participant better insights into their capabilities. So what are the things that I excel at? What are the things I do well? And what are the things I'm not doing quite as well? But what it doesn't take into account are a couple of other very important dimensions. And we believe those are, what do you personally want to do? Where's your energy? Where's your enthusiasm? What are you passionate about? Because our experience has been, and the data is, supportive of this, that those are the ones that you are far more likely to take action on and to have that action persist over a long period of time. And the third major element that needs to be combined is, you work for a company, and the company has probably provided you with this 360-degree feedback process. And when you were hired, they had some expectations and some hopes about what you would bring and what you would do. And so the combination of what your current capabilities are, what your passion is about what you want to improve and work on, and what the organization needs from you, maybe they create this Venn diagram that if you kind of lay them on top of each other, you see that there is a sweet spot. There's a sweet spot that says, okay, these are the areas where I want to have myself at a higher level, but I understand now how I am perceived and assessed by my colleagues in terms of my capability. I'm also seeing, what does the organization need from me? Maybe that comes about because of some conversations I've had with my boss or my colleagues at work on my team. And then I've been able to kind of search my own soul and say, okay, what is it that I really want to get better at? And so we think that there's a little grid that people can almost create for themselves that says, all right, of the important competencies that this 360-degree feedback instrument measures, what are my 6 highest scores? And so you see this row of competence, and this person has checked off the ones that they deem to be, are shown to be their highest scores. Then they've kind of been able to stop and think and kind of reflect on, and where do I really want to get better? And in this case, this person said, I want to get better at solving problems. I want to get better at innovating. I realized that there would be real value if I were to be better in terms of my perceived driving for results, and so forth. And then they've kind of reflected and said, let's see, what does this organization really need from me today? What is it that only I can contribute given my role and what I'm doing? And if I can just now think about, so where is it that the organization is truly expecting me to deliver? And we would submit that the sweet spot is where those three converge. And where they don't converge, it may let you see where you need to focus your effort. But this looking at how these come together, we believe is something that the 360-degree feedback can really help you do. So for example, here's an example of one 360-degree feedback instrument. That left-hand column, LP, is leadership passion. And this person has identified these 5 areas where they have some personal passion about getting better. The middle part of this chart shows the areas where they've got some pretty accurate assessments from, on average, maybe 14 of their colleagues who tell them how effective are you seen at that. And you can see here that they're seen as being pretty effective at takes initiative, but they're not seen as quite as effective at collaboration and teamwork or on building relationships. Yeah, on this instrument, it happens that the square and the diamond represent the 75th and 90th percentile. And then over on the right-hand side of this sheet, you see respondents were asked not only to give the participant a number, but they were also asked to select those capabilities or those competencies that they thought were most important for this person to have. And so the managers selected his or her kind of what they thought were the most important ones. The peers selected what they thought were the most important ones. The direct reports selected the ones that they thought were most important. And you can see that if you then combine those to a total score, now you have a picture of, okay, here's what other people think is really important for me to do. Here's what they're saying, how well I'm currently doing it. And I've been able to kind of reflect on, and where am I really eager and energized to put forth my efforts in terms of my development. So we believe that the 360-degree instrument can really help the individual in the creation of their personal development plan. And so that's one of the really important assets that it brings.
You know, Jack, you did a great job of explaining that. And, it's just, at the end of the day, if you get 360 and you don't do anything with it, it's just a waste of time and money, right? But helping people to look at it. What's fun about what we've done to kind of majority of the people focusing on their strengths, it creates a positive view of the whole process and where people want to kind of move forward. And we're going to show you some data on the effects of this that's coming up here in a minute.
Yeah, but go back to that previous slide for just a second, Joe. And that is the other thing we'd like to add is that it does capture not only information about the manager himself or herself, but it also captures the impact currently of that leader's behavior on their direct reports. So it's possible within a 360-degree feedback instrument to ask a few questions specifically to the people who report to that manager that give you insight about how that manager's behavior currently impacts it. So Joe, please explain this.
Well, one of the things that we found is that if you work for a good leader, the engagement is much higher. I showed you that graph. It's really clear. So as a leader goes through a 360, I have not seen this in another 360. There may be one out there. But one of the things we do is we have 6 questions that really only go to the direct reports, but get at their engagement. And we found that these 6 questions can really be a mini employee survey. They tell you how engaged your direct reports are. So a leader going through our 360 gets an assessment of their leadership's capabilities on 19 competencies, but they also get a sense of how engaged those direct reports are. And at the end of the day, boy, that's the result you want to see. You want to see, how do these behaviors affect my direct reports? And so these are the 6 questions that we ask. We think that data is very compelling, and it really helps a leader understand, how am I doing, and what's the level of engagement of my direct reports.
Yeah. Okay, the final building block that we want to talk with you about is very exciting to us. We think the Optimum 360 enables you to kind of track the broader impact that leadership development has on the entire organization. We want to share with you some data that we think is extremely fascinating. So just stepping back for a second, we know that most people, when they begin any kind of development process, assume that this is going to be really beneficial to the individual. That's going to help him or her to be more effective in their daily interactions with the people with whom they work. Back in 2016, we published an article in the Harvard Business Review that showed that the improved behavior of a leader and those leaders with higher leadership effectiveness scores, as measured by 360, they have subordinates who are more effective, whereas the leaders with less effective scores, they have subordinates with lower scores. So we began to see that there is this trickle-down effect of leadership. It does trickle down to the people reporting directly to the manager. What we're now able to kind of tell you is something that's, we think, extraordinarily exciting, and that is that the impact of that further development doesn't stop with the subordinates. It seems to expand and cascade and extend over a much broader range. We're submitting to you that leadership behavior and improved leadership behavior is contagious throughout the whole organization. So what you see here before you is a chart that depicts the overall leadership effectiveness scores of people who were entering in to a company's development process. And this is a 9-year picture of this organization. So back in 2015 through 2017, they had approximately 314 leaders. So just a little bit more than 100 people each year. Those people, when they entered into this process, came in with overall leadership effectiveness scores that were slightly above average. So they were at the 56th percentile. What was fascinating to us was that 3 years later, the 340 leaders that in that 3-year period of time, 2018 through 2020, when they came into the development initiative, their beginning scores were now at the 62nd percentile. And then 3 years after that, the individuals who were initially coming into the program began with overall leadership effectiveness scores at the 72nd percentile. So you see this impact of the initial leaders being developed, apparently their behavior being very contagious to the people around them. Then you have an added number of people who are performing that way in that middle 3rd-year period. And then in the final 3-year period, you see the cumulative effect of that. And so you see that from the early days where they were just slightly above average, in 2021 through 2023, they were nearly in the upper quartile. And we submit to you that, again, with all the evidence we have about the correlation between effective leadership and business results, this organization reaped an enormous benefit from their investment in leadership development. And the lessons that we would submit to you about this are, if you have a powerful leadership tool like 360-degree feedback, and you do that with a reasonable number of people in your organization, and you do that over a sustained period of time, like you see here, you have this kind of result. We've got a second example to show you. This happened to be a university, a very prestigious Ivy League university. In this case, we've got 16 years of data, and we've broken that data into 4-year kind of clusters. So you see that from 2009 through 2012, and you see the number of people who participated, and you see this over a 16-year period. But just look at it. From the first 4 years to the second 4 years, there's a 3 percentile gain. In the second group to the third group, there's a 4 percentile gain. And then in that third 4-year period to the last one, there's a 9 percentile gain. So we submit to you that the 360-degree feedback process gives the organization a way to really monitor and measure and track this rising tide of leadership effectiveness that cascades and spills over to everyone. So this, I think, is the culminating opportunity for an optimum 360 to have benefit, not just to the individuals, but to the organization itself. A well-known professor from the Wharton School of Business, Adam Grant, kind of made this comment: good leaders build products, great leaders build cultures. Good leaders deliver results, great leaders develop people. Good leaders have vision, great leaders have values, and good leaders are role models. Great leaders are role models in life, not just work. So we leave those thoughts with you. We welcome your comments. We certainly welcome your feedback. Let me toss it now to Tracy, who's going to talk with you about what we might have to extend to you. Tracy?
Great. Thank you so much, Jack and Joe, and thank you to everyone for your questions. Jack and Joe shared their point of view about the most effective 360 assessments. I've had the opportunity to experience the assessment and development experience myself, as well as support many clients, leaders, as they do the same. Robust, actionable feedback and intentional development of strengths increases individuals' impact on their teams and their organizations. Now it's your chance. If you'd like to help leaders in your organization understand how they are impacting those around them and ultimately the organization, you can test drive the assessment and host a pilot. Alternatively, we'd be glad to share a sample feedback report and help you understand how the assessment and development experience comes to life for leaders and helps them make small behavioral changes to leverage their strengths. We also know that feedback is a gift, and we welcome yours. As we conclude, please complete the survey that will automatically pop up, or click on the bit.ly link in the chat. And as a thank you for participating, we'll send you the Extraordinary Leader ebook. We appreciate your participation today and hope you will continue to join us every month as we share research and insights into leadership.